And we're fortunate to have here today with us Al Bellg, joining us, I think, from Appleton, Wisconsin. Go ahead, Al.
Well, thank you. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to share with you today. Let's start with a few moments of silence and open ourselves to the light. Oh, thank you, friends. I'll just say a word or two about myself. I'm the clerk of spiritual nurture for Winnebago Worship Group in Northeast Wisconsin. And I facilitate a weekly spiritual nurture group for our worship group. I'm also on the Ministry and Nurture Committee for a Northern Yearly Meeting. But I would say I would count my first Quaker experiences really as being part of Circles of Trust, the retreat process that was developed by Parker Palmer out of his experience as a Quaker. And today I'd like to talk with you about something that I found myself immediately drawn to as I became more familiar with Quaker practice, and that is the experiment with light. Many of you may already be familiar with it, but I'll review it just briefly here. It's essentially a guided meditation. It was developed by Rex Ambler, who's a UK theologian and Quaker. And he developed it after studying the writings of George Fox and early Quakers, with a particular goal of trying to understand what they were experiencing during worship and how they went about experiencing it. And part of his goal was to also answer the question, how is it that our current experience of Quaker worship doesn't seem to be quite as powerful and as fertile an experience as the early Quakers seem to report? So with that question in mind and his understanding of what George Fox was about in the early days of Quakers, he developed this guided meditation that he called the experiment with light. And it's an experiment in the old-fashioned sense. I think if he were developing it, if he were referring perhaps more to what our current experience might be, he would probably have called it an experience of light. But he's using the old-fashioned language, which was very fresh at the time of the early Quakers, when science was just beginning, and the idea of doing an experiment was very experiential. It was very much on the kind of the cutting edge of what we knew to be real and true. So I think a good place to start here with understanding the experiment with light and this experience of early Quakers is what their understanding of the light was. Because you know, there's a lot of ways to sort of think about it, and I'm going to refer to some of the ideas in Rex's Pendle Hill pamphlet called "The Light Within," Then and Now, to talk briefly about this. The light, as he understands it from the writings of early Quakers, is the capacity for awareness in every human being. Okay. It's not like some glowing thing in the corner that we're looking for when we're trying to tune into the light. It's something within us that shows us the truth that we need to see, the reality that is our lives. And this is, as you undoubtedly have experienced, and certainly as I've experienced, a very great challenge to the ego. You know, the ego isn't interested in the truth. The ego is interested in sort of assembling facts that supports its interpretation of what's going on and our human agendas. So it's, if we start out by thinking of something, the light within us showing us, revealing to us what we need to see, the first thing that's on that list for Rex, and he believed for George Fox and so on, is not some grand pronouncement about the world, some wonderful insight that you need to be able to share with everybody and to throw into the world. It's actually insights about ourselves. How can we receive guidance that's true about others and about the world unless we've done a fair amount of work on ourselves and come to a great, considerable understanding of our own limitations and our own biases, and being able to work through some of those things. We need to be, I think, truly ourselves before we can be open to the light and receive guidance for others. And I will just share a personal story that's relatively recent for me. I've been sort of a spiritual seeker and meditator and done a whole variety of sort of spiritual growth things for my whole life, which means that's quite a lot of years at this point. So a few weeks ago, not long ago at all, I was entering into a worship experience after being particularly sort of excited about this process of sort of exploring my own experience and learning what I needed to know. And so I just said, show me what I need to see. I welcome the light, and I welcome what I need to see. And so I'm sitting there in worship, and I start getting irritated. I start getting sort of bothered by the things that sometimes preoccupy me, the little petty sort of annoyances and resentments and irritations. And I'm going, those are the distractions. I have to get these out. And they kept coming. They kept coming. They kept coming. And I realized that's exactly what I needed to see. I needed to see that there was a significant part of my time was spent inwardly occupied with these resentments and irritations that I had not worked through. Those inner distractions were what the light showed me that I needed to work on. And in the 2 or 3 weeks since that time, I've done a great deal of work on them, and things have changed noticeably, but they're still there, and there's still a fresh cutting edge for me to see how something I need to work on. So it's the light shows us what we need to see, even if it may be surprising, even if it may be something that we're not we think is not as significant, but just an ordinary part of our life. So the third thing, though, that Rex lifted up, that he got from the readings, George Fox and others, was that once you have moved at least a little ways through some of your own stuff that keeps you separate from others, you start to see the unity that underlies our existence and our relationship with each other, our relationship with nature, our environment. our deep connection with each other, and perhaps even a deep sympathy with the difficulties that others have in seeing those things, that connection with each other. So with that in mind, as I became more involved with the experiment with light, I realized that, and coming out of my experience with Parker's group, I realized that we needed to set up a kind of environment for doing the experiment with light that I think facilitated it both within ourselves and in the sharing that is involved with the experiment with light. So we start out before the experiment with light, this guided meditation, by welcoming the truth, welcoming what the light may show us, and being open to whatever the light may reveal, accepting and with what we discover about ourselves and others with kindness and with compassion. And then after the guided meditation itself, we have a period of about 10 minutes for personal reflection, perhaps note-taking and so on. And then we go into about a 20-minute sharing experience where we share with others in a small group what insights have come to us during the experiment. And again, with the notion of creating a safe space for that sharing. We share what feels right to share, as little or as much of the insight and experiences we're comfortable with. We maintain an attentive and caring silence between people sharing in sort of the worship sharing model. We take time between speakers in that same model, and we observe a deep level of confidentiality. So the experiment with light, as I said, is a guided meditation, and it lasts about 40 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes. And Rex gave us his first version of it, and I worked with that for a number of months during the monthly experiment with light that I facilitate, and then have slowly over time evolved some edits to it and some rewrites to it to make it simpler and more straightforward. So I'll just say that the different steps that we currently use involve getting comfortable and relaxing and setting aside distractions. The second is then letting what's important in your life emerge. And after we've sat with that for a little bit, then focusing on one thing that has presented itself to get a sense of it as a whole. And then to look behind what that might be, to see why it is the way that it is. Then to welcome and to be grateful for the insight that's come. And then finally, to notice how we feel different after we've had that experience. Because one of the experiences I think that is a sign of a genuine insight from the light is a sense of resolution or deeper truth that has landed in a place where we know that this is what we need to experience at this moment. So I would like us to engage in worship today by doing something that we open our own weekly worship with in Winnebago Worship Group. Coming out of this experiment with light, I thought, might there be a way to start our worship every week with some guidance that would allow us to engage more deeply with the light instead of just quietly turning to the silence or having the clerk just say, well, let's begin worship now, friends, or something like that. Is there a way to be just slightly more directive, to open ourselves to the light a little more explicitly and deeply? So I'd like to begin worship by just reading what we read and what we open our own worship with And then we can go directly into silent worship after I've done reading it. As Quakers, we know that the light is in us and in all beings. Let us release any inner distractions from the light and set aside the personal thoughts that occupy us. Let us welcome the light and its insight and guidance for our lives and relationships, our meeting, and our world. Friends, let us open ourselves to the light.